"I miss feeling wanted," said the mail-order bride to the lone rancher. The ranch sat far from the nearest town, surrounded by wide fields and open sky. It was a quiet place where the wind spoke more than people did. The lone rancher had lived there for many years. His days started before sunrise and ended after dark. He fed the animals, fixed fences, and worked the land with steady hands. Life followed the same routine every day. There was no rush, no noise, and no one waiting for him at the end of the day. He had once imagined a different life. Long ago, he thought he would have a family, laughter in the house, and someone to share meals with. But time passed, chances were missed, and loss slowly taught him to expect very little from life. He did not complain. He simply accepted the silence as part of who he had become. The house on the ranch was clean but plain. Everything had a purpose, nothing extra. One chair by the window, one plate on the table, one cup by the sink. At night, he often sat alone, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the grass. Sometimes he wondered how many years had passed without a real conversation. The idea of a mail-order bride did not come from romance. It came from need. The ranch was too big for one person, and age had begun to slow him down. Neighbors, few as they were, suggested he consider marriage. At first, he dismissed the idea. He believed love was something that happened to other people, not him. But loneliness has a way of speaking softly and often. Over time, the thought stopped feeling strange. He read letters carefully, not looking for beauty or passion. He looked for honesty, strength, and someone who understood hard work. When he chose her, it was because her words felt simple and real. She did not promise love. She promised effort. Far away, the woman prepared to leave everything she knew. Her life had not been easy. She grew up learning to survive, not dream. When the offer came, she did not imagine romance either. She imagined safety, stability, and a chance to start again. She packed her belongings into one small suitcase. Each item mattered because it carried a memory she could not take with her. The journey was long and tiring. Every mile took her farther from the past and closer to something unknown. She wondered what kind of man waited for her. Would he be kind? Would he ignore her? Would she feel like a stranger forever? These questions stayed with her, but she pushed them aside. This was a choice she made for survival, not comfort. When she finally arrived, the sky was wide and open, unlike anything she had seen before. The rancher stood waiting near the gate. He removed his hat when he saw her. He was taller than she expected, his face shaped by years of sun and work. His eyes held caution, not warmth, but also not cruelty. They greeted each other politely. No embrace, no excitement, just a quiet understanding that both were unsure how to begin. He helped carry her suitcase inside. The house felt too quiet for two people. She noticed how little decoration there was, how every object seemed chosen for usefulness rather than beauty. He showed her the rooms, explaining things in short sentences. She listened carefully, nodding, not wanting to appear ungrateful. When he finished, there was an awkward pause. Neither knew what to say next. Finally, he told her she must be tired and that supper would be ready soon. They ate at the table in silence. The sound of cutlery felt louder than their voices. She tried to smile, tried to appear calm, but inside she felt unsure. This was her new life, and she did not know where she fit into it yet. That night, she lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. The house made small sounds, settling as old houses do. She wondered if she had made a mistake, but she reminded herself why she came. She was not here to be loved right away. She was here to build something slowly. The rancher in the other room also could not sleep. He listened to the sounds of another person in the house and felt strange about it. He had invited someone into his carefully guarded world, and now there was no going back. He worried he would fail her, that his silence might feel like rejection. Morning came early. The ranch did not wait for feelings to settle. Work needed to be done. He showed her simple tasks, explaining patiently. She worked without complaint, even when her hands grew sore. He noticed her effort but did not comment much. Praise did not come easily to him. As days passed, their routine formed. They spoke when needed and stayed quiet when words felt unnecessary. She cleaned, cooked, and helped where she could. He continued his work, careful not to overwhelm her. Both were respectful, distant, and unsure. Yet small moments began to appear. He noticed how she hummed softly while working. She noticed how he always made sure the path was clear before she walked through the fields. These moments were not spoken about, but they mattered. Still, the emptiness remained. She felt useful but unseen. He felt grateful but afraid to show it. The arrangement was working, but something important was missing. Neither knew how to name it yet. The ranch stayed quiet, but change had begun, slow and uncertain, like the first signs of rain on dry ground. The days on the ranch began to settle into a steady rhythm. Morning always arrived early, carried in by the soft light over the fields. The woman woke before the sun, unsure at first where she was, then remembering. Each morning felt the same and yet different. She was no longer alone, but she did not feel fully connected either. She learned the routines quickly. Water to be carried, meals to prepare, animals to check. The work was harder than she expected, but she did not complain. Hard work was familiar to her. What felt heavy was the quiet between them. They spoke only when needed. Their words were careful and brief, like people afraid of saying too much. The rancher watched her more than he realized. He noticed how she pushed herself even when tired, how she cleaned the house as if trying to earn her place in it. He wanted to tell her she did not have to prove anything, but the words stayed trapped inside him. He had spent years believing emotions were dangerous. Silence had been his armor. At meals, they sat across from each other, eating slowly. Sometimes he asked simple questions about her day. She answered politely but did not go into detail. She had learned that sharing too much too soon often led to disappointment. So she kept her thoughts to herself, even when loneliness pressed against her chest. The house, though no longer empty, still felt quiet. At night, she sat by the small window in her room, watching the stars. She missed familiar sounds from her past, even those tied to difficult memories. Here, the silence felt wide and endless. One afternoon, a strong wind damaged part of the fence. The rancher worked for hours trying to fix it before dark. She saw him struggling and brought him water without being asked. He nodded in thanks, surprised by the gesture. For a brief moment, their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. But the moment faded quickly as both stepped back into their roles. The distance between them was not unkind, but it was heavy. She felt like a guest who had stayed too long, always careful not to disturb. She followed his lead, never entering his space unless invited. At times, she wondered if he regretted his decision. The rancher, on the other hand, feared making her uncomfortable. He worried that any small gesture might be misunderstood. He had never learned how to show care openly. Instead, he showed it through quiet actions. He fixed the door that stuck in her room. He left her gloves by the stove on cold mornings. He checked on her work without making it seem like concern. She noticed these things. They made her feel safer but not truly seen. Safety and belonging were not the same. At night, her thoughts became louder. She questioned whether she would ever feel like more than a helper in his life. One evening, they shared a simple meal after a long day. The sky outside turned orange and purple. She tried to start a conversation, asking about the land. He answered briefly, then returned to silence. The disappointment in her chest grew heavier. She realized then how much she missed being noticed, being valued beyond usefulness. The feeling surprised her. She had told herself she did not need emotional closeness. But the heart has its own voice. As days turned into weeks, the unspoken tension grew. Neither argued. Neither complained, but something fragile was building beneath the surface. She felt invisible, and he felt unsure how to reach her. The ranch, once silent, now held two people carrying unspoken loneliness under the same roof. The days passed slowly on the ranch, each one a quiet echo of the one before. The woman continued her work diligently, rising before the sun, feeding the animals and tending to the house. The rancher watched her from a distance, careful not to disturb her rhythm, careful not to reveal too much of himself. Though they were under the same roof, they still felt like strangers learning to live together. One evening, after a long day of chores, the woman sat by the fireplace, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The light flickered across her face, highlighting the weariness in her eyes. She had grown used to the routine, but routine could not fill the emptiness she carried inside. Every day she asked herself if this life was truly what she wanted, if the silence between them would ever end. The rancher entered the room quietly, holding a small bundle of firewood. He set it down without a word, and the sound of the wood settling into place filled the room more than his presence did. She glanced at him, and for the first time noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. There was a weight in those eyes, something unspoken, something both heavy and gentle. "I miss feeling wanted," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. The words felt strange as they left her mouth, almost foreign. She did not expect a response. She only needed to speak them, to give voice to the loneliness she had held tightly inside for years. The rancher froze, the bundle of wood still in his hands. He had never heard words like that from her. Words that spoke not of chores or schedules, but of longing. For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with its warmth. He had lived a lifetime with silence and distance, and now those walls were trembling. She looked down at her hands, unsure if she had made a mistake. She expected him to turn away, to retreat into his quiet self as he always had. But he did not. Instead, he sat in the chair opposite her, leaning back slightly, his eyes fixed on her face. His presence was steady, patient, and it spoke louder than words ever could. He began, then stopped. The words caught in his throat. He had never been good at speaking feelings aloud. Emotions had always been something he handled in silence, through actions rather than words. But tonight her honesty demanded a response. He searched for the right words, and when none came, he simply nodded, a small gesture, yet one that held the weight of understanding. For the first time she felt seen. Not for the work she did, not for the chores she completed, but for her heart. The part of her that longed for connection, for recognition, for the simple warmth of being wanted. That moment broke through the distance that had kept them apart, however slightly. In the days that followed, small changes began to appear. He started leaving little notes for her by the stove, reminders of practical things but with a touch of personal attention. "The water trough was low, filled it for you," one read. She smiled the first time she found one, feeling a quiet warmth in her chest. These small gestures began to speak a language she understood, a language of care and attention. She, in turn, began to notice the small ways he tried to connect. How he made sure her boots were dry in the morning, how he would pause and wait for her to catch up while walking the fields. Actions replaced the missing words, slowly bridging the gap between their loneliness and the potential for something more. One afternoon, while mending a fence together, she dared to ask him a question about his past, something personal, something that required trust. He hesitated, then shared a brief story about his childhood, a memory of his father teaching him to ride a horse and care for the land. It was a small window into his life, but it meant the world. She listened intently, nodding, letting him know that his past, his experiences, mattered to her. Their shared moments grew quietly. A touch on the shoulder when passing in the kitchen, a hand extended to help her climb over a gate, a soft word spoken before dawn. These were not grand gestures, but they held meaning. Each small act chipped away at the walls they had built around themselves, and slowly the weight of loneliness began to lift. Yet uncertainty remained. She still feared rejection, still wondered if her feelings were misplaced. He still worried that showing too much emotion might push her away. Both carried the ghosts of past disappointments, and both knew that trust would take time to grow. One evening, after a long day in the fields, they sat outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was a wash of orange and purple, the air crisp with the coming night. She leaned against the railing, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax completely in his presence. He did not speak much, but he did not need to. His silence was no longer empty. It was a companionable quiet that spoke of patience and understanding. "I never thought I'd say this," she murmured, "but I feel like I can stay here." Her voice was soft, tentative, but there was hope woven into it. The rancher nodded, understanding her without judgment. He had never expected her to stay so easily, and yet the acknowledgement of her words was more than either of them had expected. The fireflies began to dance in the fields, tiny lights flickering in the dark. She watched them, feeling a spark of life she had not felt in a long time. He stood beside her, not touching but close enough that the warmth of his presence was comforting. They were not yet a couple, not yet fully connected, but the first steps had been taken. The first cracks in the walls had appeared. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the words she had spoken earlier. They had been frightening, exposing a vulnerability she rarely allowed. But she also realized that speaking them had changed something. The rancher's silence, once heavy and unyielding, now felt like a presence she could trust. For the first time, she imagined a future where she might not feel invisible, where she might be wanted not just for what she did, but for who she was. And the rancher, lying awake in the next room, thought about the weight of her words. He understood the depth of what she had shared. He understood that he could no longer remain distant, that to build a home together, he needed to show his care in ways beyond work and routine. For the first time, he considered the possibility that he could be more than a quiet, solitary man, that perhaps he could learn to be wanted in return. In those quiet, thoughtful hours, both began to change. One had dared to speak, and the other had dared to listen. One had admitted longing, and the other had begun to recognize it. The ranch, still quiet, now held the beginning of something fragile, tentative, and real, a connection that had the potential to grow. And so life continued, simple and slow, yet different. Each day brought work, sure, but also small chances for understanding, for closeness, for the first sparks of companionship. The past loneliness still lingered, but it was no longer the only companion in the house. A quiet hope had arrived, and with it, the first signs that being wanted, and showing desire for another, was possible even in the most unlikely places. The days on the ranch began to change in small, almost invisible ways. The routine was still there, feeding the animals, repairing fences, tending the fields, but now it carried a new rhythm. There was a quiet awareness in both of them, a subtle recognition that life together could be more than work and survival. They were learning to see each other, not just as a companion or helper, but as someone who mattered. The woman woke earlier than usual one morning, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She walked outside into the crisp air, watching the sun rise over the open fields. The light painted everything in soft gold, and she felt a sense of calm she had not known for years. The rancher joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word, and she smiled, feeling the warmth of the gesture. It was small, but it spoke volumes. Their days were filled with practical work, yet each task became a moment to show care. When the water troughs were low, he filled them first for the animals, then made sure she had a fresh bucket. When fences needed repair, she handed him tools and offered suggestions. There was a quiet understanding forming between them, a rhythm of cooperation that went beyond necessity. They were beginning to function as a team, though neither had put words to it yet. One afternoon, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. The wind howled across the fields and dark clouds swallowed the sun. They rushed to secure the animals, closing gates and bringing the smaller livestock into the barn. In the chaos, she slipped on the wet ground and he was there instantly, steadying her with his hands. For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Safety and care, concern and relief, all mingled in that simple gesture. That evening, after the storm had passed, they sat by the fireplace, drying off and sipping warm drinks. She broke the silence first, asking about his life before the ranch. At first, he answered briefly, hesitant to reveal too much, but she listened without judgment, encouraging him to continue. Slowly, he opened up about childhood memories, hardships he had faced, and lessons learned from years of solitude. She nodded, not interrupting, allowing him to speak freely. In that quiet listening, she became more than a presence in his home. She became a confidant. The rancher, too, began to show his feelings in subtle ways. He learned to notice her small gestures, the way she hummed softly while working, the way her hands trembled when tired. He started offering help before she even asked, predicting her needs. When he placed warm gloves by the stove for her hands on a cold morning or made sure her favorite chair was in the sunlight, she began to feel truly seen. These actions, though quiet, were powerful. They told her she mattered to him, not through words but through care. Meals became moments of connection. They no longer sat in silence but began to share stories about the day. She told him small anecdotes from her past, not grand tales but simple memories that made her laugh or sigh. He listened, occasionally sharing his own small stories. The house, once a place of quiet duty, now held laughter and conversation. The walls, which had only echoed the sounds of work, began to reflect warmth and companionship. Challenges still came, of course. A broken fence, a sick animal, or an unexpected visitor could test their patience. Yet, even in those moments, they began to rely on each other in ways they had never imagined. When the fence collapsed in a corner of the pasture, they worked side by side, fixing it with cooperation and care. Their hands sometimes brushed, and instead of tension, there was a small spark of understanding. She began to notice subtle changes in herself. The fear of being unwanted, the hesitation to speak her feelings, began to ease. She smiled more, laughed more, and allowed herself moments of rest without guilt. She realized that the rancher's quiet care was not conditional. She could be herself, with all her imperfections, and still feel valued. The rancher, too, felt a shift. He had spent so many years protecting himself with silence and routine that he had forgotten how to connect. But now he was learning that care and affection did not weaken him, they strengthened him. When he noticed her struggling with chores or hesitating in a decision, he offered guidance and support. He was no longer just a solitary man managing a ranch. He was a partner, present and attentive, even if words still felt difficult. One afternoon, as they worked together in the fields, she paused and looked at him. "I didn't expect it to feel like this," she said softly. I thought I'd just be surviving here, but it feels different, better." He nodded, acknowledging her words without needing to add much. Sometimes listening was more than speaking. He understood that actions, consistency, and patience were creating trust, slowly weaving their lives together. Evenings became a time of quiet companionship. They would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the space in comfort. She learned that being wanted did not always come with grand declarations of love. It came in small moments, a hand steadying hers, a warm meal prepared with thought, a shared laugh at the end of a long day. Winter approached, bringing shorter days and longer nights. The ranch required more work, more vigilance. Yet with each challenge, their bond deepened. They faced it together, weathering storms, caring for the animals, and managing the farm. Each shared struggle built a layer of trust, turning the house into a home and the routine into a rhythm of life they could navigate together. One snowy evening, she watched him repair the barn roof in the cold, his movements steady despite the wind. She realized with a quiet sense of wonder that she was beginning to feel safe, not just physically but emotionally. She trusted him. She valued his presence, and in return she felt his care, steady and patient, shaping her sense of belonging. The rancher, too, noticed her growing ease. He saw her laugh freely at small jokes, observed the way she relaxed while working, and felt a strange warmth at her presence. He realized that he wanted her happiness, not just her help on the ranch. Slowly, he began allowing himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, he wanted more than companionship. Maybe he wanted her, not only as a helper but as someone who mattered deeply. By spring, the transformation was clear. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home filled with quiet understanding and mutual respect. The woman had stopped questioning her place. She belonged. The rancher had stopped hiding behind silence. He showed care in ways small and consistent, proving that feelings could be expressed even without grand words. Together, they faced challenges and celebrated small victories. A newborn calf, a repaired fence, a successful harvest, all were shared achievements. Their partnership had evolved from necessity to something meaningful, built on trust, patience, and shared effort. In quiet moments, they would catch each other's eyes and feel the unspoken bond that had grown between them. It was a slow, careful process, but it was real. They had learned that choosing someone every day, showing care in small ways, and being patient with each other was the foundation of love. The ranch, once silent and lonely, now echoed with warmth and connection. They had discovered that life could be more than survival. It could be companionship, respect, and the quiet joy of being truly seen and valued. And in that understanding, both of them began to hope for a future that was shared, for a life that was more than routine, and for a home filled with the quiet certainty of care. The ranch had changed in ways that neither of them could have imagined when she first arrived. What was once a house of routine and quiet now carried warmth, care, and a sense of home. The woman had grown used to the rhythm of life on the ranch, but more than that, she had begun to feel a connection she had never thought possible. It was not instant, not dramatic, but steady, patient, and real. She no longer questioned whether she belonged. She did. Morning light filtered through the windows, and she rose with a sense of purpose that went beyond chores. She carried her coffee outside, breathing in the crisp air and watching the fields stretch endlessly. The rancher was already awake, tending to the animals with careful hands. When he saw her, he nodded, a small smile brushing his lips. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried warmth, acknowledgement, and the beginning of trust spoken in silence. The day's work began, as it always did, but now they moved together in a way that spoke of understanding. She fed the animals with efficiency, and he checked the fences, occasionally pausing to hand her tools or guide her hands. Their movements no longer felt separate, they were in sync. This partnership had developed slowly, quietly, with patience and care. Small actions replaced words, teaching them both that love could grow in subtle ways. She realized how much she had missed being wanted, not just for help, not just for her presence, but for her heart. The rancher's attention, once cautious and restrained, had grown intentional. He noticed the way she hesitated before certain tasks and offered help without making her feel incapable. He watched her laugh at small jokes, offering smiles of understanding. She felt herself relax into his care, and for the first time in years, her heart felt light. The rancher, too, was changing. He had spent a lifetime protecting himself from disappointment, from loss, from feeling too much. Yet, in her presence, he began to see that opening up did not mean vulnerability, it meant life. Every small smile, every word she shared, every moment of shared work reminded him that he was not alone. He found himself thinking about her comfort, her happiness, and slowly, he realized he wanted her in his life, not just as a companion, but as someone who mattered in ways he had not allowed himself to consider before. Evenings became moments of quiet intimacy. They would sit by the fireplace, talking about the day, sharing memories, or sometimes just sitting in silence. It was no longer the heavy silence of strangers or obligation. It was comfortable, shared, and filled with the kind of connection that grew from patience and care. She would lean against the railing outside to watch the stars, and he would quietly join her, offering presence without words, allowing the moment to speak for itself. One spring morning, they faced a challenge together, a sick calf that had been born the night before. They worked side by side, tending to it, keeping it warm and making sure it could stand and drink. The process was tiring, the stress pressing down on them, yet neither complained. Each movement, each gesture, showed care for the animal, yes, but also for each other. By the time the calf was stable, they looked at one another with quiet satisfaction. In that shared effort, trust had deepened. They had learned that challenges could bring them closer, that working together created bonds stronger than words alone. Over time, small traditions formed. They shared meals at the table, no longer awkwardly polite, but with laughter, stories, and sometimes playful teasing. She learned to prepare his favorite breakfast, and he noticed, quietly appreciating the thought behind it. He brought small gifts from town, sometimes practical, sometimes simple treats, showing that he thought of her even when she was not there. Each act, though minor, carried meaning. Each moment reinforced the feeling that they were chosen each day for each other. The ranch, once a place of solitude, became a home. The rooms carried warmth and light, both from the sun and from the bond growing between them. She began to decorate little corners with flowers or small items that reminded her of home. He noticed these touches and quietly allowed them, understanding that the house now reflected not only his life but hers as well. They were building something together, slowly, carefully, and with intention. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, she walked to the barn and found him repairing a gate. She called out softly and he looked up, his face tired but calm. "Need help?" she asked. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Just making sure it's safe," he said. She watched him for a moment, seeing the dedication in his eyes, the care in his hands, and felt a wave of gratitude and affection. She realized then that being wanted was not always about words. It was about consistency, care, and the effort to protect and value someone every day. That evening, they sat outside, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky turn shades of pink and purple. She leaned her head on his shoulder and he did not move away. Instead, he allowed her closeness, feeling it himself for the first time without fear. They did not need to speak. The quiet spoke enough. The trust, the understanding, the sense of belonging, all of it was present in that simple moment. Weeks turned into months. Seasons shifted, and the ranch saw the beauty of growth and change. Crops flourished, animals thrived, and their partnership strengthened. Life was not perfect. There were still long days, heavy work, and occasional disagreements, but the foundation was unshakable. They had learned that love was not always dramatic or immediate. It was built through patience, effort, and shared experience. She found herself smiling without reason, laughing freely, and feeling appreciated in ways she had never thought possible. He found himself thinking of her during the day, feeling concern when she was tired, and pride when she accomplished a task. Both understood that choosing someone every day, caring for them consistently, and being present mattered more than words or promises. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, she spoke softly. "I think I belong here. Not just on the ranch with you." The rancher turned to her, his eyes reflecting surprise, gratitude, and something deeper. He nodded slowly, feeling the weight and truth of her words. "You do," he said simply. "You always have." The words carried more than affirmation. They carried the acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together. From strangers living under one roof to partners in life, bound by trust, care, and quiet affection. They had learned to choose each other every day, not through grand gestures but through patience, shared effort, and the steady commitment to see and value one another. The ranch, once silent and lonely, now rang with life, warmth, and connection. The woman no longer feared being invisible, and the rancher no longer feared letting someone into his heart. They had built a home together, not just a house, and in that home they found the kind of belonging and love that only comes when two people learn to truly see each other. Even as night fell and the stars shone above, the ranch felt alive. It carried laughter, shared moments, quiet understanding, and the gentle assurance that they had found something rare, a life together where both were wanted, valued, and chosen. The journey had been slow, full of uncertainty, and at times heavy with fear, but now it was real. And in that reality, they discovered the greatest truth of all. Love is not always sudden or dramatic. Sometimes it is steady, patient, and built one thoughtful, caring moment at a time. From that day forward, the rancher and his bride continued their life together with a sense of peace and fulfillment. They faced challenges, yes, but now together. They worked hard, but now with joy in each other's presence. And every day, in small gestures and quiet moments, they reminded each other that they were wanted, valued, and never alone. The story of their life on the ranch became one of patient growth, understanding, and a love that could withstand time. It was a love that had started in silence and caution, and had grown into something steady, comforting, and real. A home where hearts were finally full, and a future they could face together, hand in hand, heart to heart.